Through the storm. Rebuilding after Hurricane Katrina. I never expected to lose everything at 53. When you reach that age, you think you've weathered life's storms. You've built something stable. A home, a family, memories contained in photo albums and trinkets collected over decades. But on August 29, 2005, I learned how quickly it could all be washed away. My name is Marcus Johnson. For 30 years, I taught music at a high school in New Orleans' lower 9th ward. My wife, Darlene, and I raised 3 children in our modest 2-story home on Jourdan Avenue, just a few blocks from the industrial canal. We were part of a tight-knit community, the kind where neighbors watched out for each other, and Saturday cookouts spilled from one yard to the next. We'd seen hurricanes before. Growing up in New Orleans means learning to live with the threat of storms. We'd evacuated a few times over the years, packed the car with clothes and photo albums, secured the house as best we could, and driven to stay with Darlene's sister in Houston until the danger passed. Most times we'd return to find minor damage. A fence down, shingles torn from the roof, water in the garage. Nothing we couldn't handle. When the warnings about Katrina began, we initially planned to do the same. But Darlene's mother had been battling pneumonia in Touro Infirmary, and my wife was reluctant to leave her. "It'll blow over like they always do," she said, though the weather reports were more ominous than usual. By the time we realized the severity of the approaching storm, the highways were clogged with evacuees. Mayor Nagin had ordered a mandatory evacuation, but thousands remained in the city. Those without transportation, the elderly, the stubborn, and yes, people like us, torn by difficult choices. We made a last-minute decision to split up. Darlene would stay with her mother at the hospital, which had backup generators and was on higher ground. I would remain at home with our dog Charlie, a golden retriever who'd been part of our family for 11 years. Our children were grown and living in different states, safe at least from what was coming. The night before Katrina hit, I called each of my kids. "I love you," I told them, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll call as soon as it's over." I didn't know it would be weeks before they heard my voice again. The storm itself was terrifying. Howling winds that sounded like freight trains, rain so heavy it seemed to be coming from all directions. I'd moved to the 2nd floor with Charlie, some food, water, and a battery-powered radio. Through the night and into the morning, I listened to the destruction, the cracking of trees, the crash of objects hitting the house. But it was what came after that changed everything. I was dozing fitfully when I heard a sound like thunder, followed by a rush of water. The industrial canal levee had breached. Within minutes, water was pouring into our neighborhood. I looked out the window to see it rising rapidly, cars already submerged, front porches disappearing. I grabbed Charlie and a few essentials and made it to the attic just as water began flowing up the stairs. The hatch to the roof was stuck. I had to kick it open. We emerged into eerie daylight, the neighborhood transformed into a vast lake with rooftops like islands. I won't dwell on those days, on the roof. The blistering sun, the night so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, the helicopters passing overhead, the cries from other rooftops. Charlie pressed against me, as confused and frightened as I was. On the 3rd day, a Coast Guard helicopter spotted us. The rescue swimmer who came down told me I could only bring what I could carry in one hand. I had to leave almost everything behind. I looked at Charlie, then at the rescuer. "The dog comes," I said. It wasn't a question. The young man nodded. "We'll make it work." We were dropped at an emergency collection point on the interstate. From there, buses took us to the Superdome, which had become a shelter of last resort. The scenes there haunt me still. Thousands of people in deteriorating conditions, inadequate food and water, overflowing toilets, the heat and smell unbearable. I kept Charlie close, sharing my meager rations with him, both of us shell-shocked. Through it all, I worried constantly about Darlene. The hospital had been evacuated, I learned, but to where? Communications were down throughout the city. The not knowing was its own kind of torture. After 4 nightmarish days in the Superdome, I was evacuated to a shelter in Baton Rouge. It was there, scrolling through handwritten lists of evacuees posted on walls, that I saw Darlene's name. She'd been taken to another shelter in the same city. Our reunion the next day was one of those moments where joy and grief collide. We held each other and cried, for finding each other, for what we'd lost, for her mother who had died during the hospital evacuation, for our ruined home and community. I tried to save the photo albums, I told her, breaking down. Those irreplaceable memories, our wedding, the children's birthdays, family holidays, all gone. We're alive, she said, cupping my face in her hands. We start from there. Over the following weeks, we moved between shelters, then to a FEMA trailer. We registered for assistance, stood in endless lines, filled out countless forms. Charlie became a favorite among the children in the shelters, a small bright spot in their disrupted lives. 2 months after Katrina, we were able to return briefly to our neighborhood. Nothing prepared us for what we found. Our house was still standing, but barely. The waterline reached almost to the 2nd floor. Inside was unrecognizable. Furniture overturned, walls bloated with mold, everything coated in dried muck. The piano where I'd taught countless lessons to neighborhood kids was warped beyond repair. The family photos I'd tried to save dissolved into unrecognizable pulp. We salvaged almost nothing, just a few water-damaged mementos and my father's pocket watch that had somehow survived in a dresser drawer. Our neighbors' homes were in similar or worse condition. Some houses had been completely washed away, leaving only concrete slabs. The streets were deserted except for military vehicles and the occasional cleanup crew. "We can't come back here," Darlene said, her voice hollow. "There's nothing left to come back to." She was right. The lower 9th ward, once vibrant with life and music, had become a ghost town. Basic services, electricity, water, gas, would take months or years to restore. The schools where we'd worked were destroyed, and like many in our community, our insurance wouldn't cover most of the damage. The fine print excluding flood damage had sealed our fate. We faced the hardest decision of our lives, whether to rebuild or relocate. Darlene's sister offered us a place to stay in Houston while we figured things out. With few options, we accepted. Those first months in Houston were a blur of grief, paperwork, and uncertainty. I found work as a substitute music teacher, while Darlene took a job at a department store. We lived in Rachel's spare bedroom, Charlie adapting to apartment life. Every day brought a new humiliation, borrowing clothes, asking for rides, learning to live with constant charity. Our children wanted us to move near them, New York, Chicago, Atlanta. Start fresh, they said. But something in me resisted. New Orleans wasn't just where we lived. It was part of who we were. "I can't explain it," I told Darlene one night. "But I feel like if we leave for good, we're giving up on more than just our house." She nodded, understanding. I feel it too. 6 months after Katrina, we returned to New Orleans to make a final decision. The city was still reeling, but signs of recovery had begun to emerge. Some businesses had reopened. Residents were trickling back. Volunteers from around the country were helping with cleanup and rebuilding. Our neighborhood remained largely abandoned, but we noticed small changes. A cleaned-up lot here, a FEMA trailer there, a newly planted tree. We met Mr. Wilson, our elderly neighbor who'd refused to leave. He was living in a small trailer beside his ruined home, determined to rebuild. "This is home," he said simply. "Where else would I go?" His words resonated with us. That evening, sitting in a small rented room, Darlene and I made our decision. We would return, but not to the lower Ninth Ward, at least not yet. We would start smaller, in a part of the city that had seen less damage, where recovery was further along. With our insurance settlement, inadequate as it was, FEMA assistance, and a loan against my pension, we bought a small duplex in Gentilly. The previous owners had evacuated and decided not to return. The house needed work, new drywall, floors, appliances, but the structure was sound. We moved back to New Orleans in June 2006, almost a year after Katrina. Our new home wasn't in our old neighborhood, didn't hold our history, but it was a start. Charlie seemed especially pleased to have a yard again. Remaking our lives took time and presented challenges we'd never imagined. Simple tasks, finding a doctor, getting mail delivered, registering a car, had become complicated in post-Katrina New Orleans. Services we took for granted before, reliable electricity, garbage collection, police response, were inconsistent at best. I found a teaching position at a charter school that had reopened. The school was overcrowded, under-equipped, and housed in a temporary building. But the students, many traumatized by their own Katrina experiences, needed stability and normalcy. Music gave them that. In those first months back, I saw how healing it could be to create something beautiful amid so much destruction. Darlene, always more adaptable than me, reinvented herself completely. Before Katrina, she'd worked as an administrative assistant at the same school where I taught. Now, inspired by her experience with displacement, she took a position with a non-profit helping evacuees navigate the Byzantine process of securing assistance and rebuilding. "I lived it," she would tell her clients. "I know how overwhelming this is." Our new life developed its own rhythm. We made new friends among our neighbors and co-workers, many of whom shared similar stories of loss and reinvention. On weekends, we often drove to the lower Ninth Ward to check on reconstruction efforts and visit Mr. Wilson, who was slowly rebuilding his house with help from church volunteers. We also began the painstaking process of replacing what was lost: new clothes to fill our closets, kitchen items, furniture, some second-hand, some donated. But the hardest to replace were the personal items, the photographs, letters, children's artwork, family heirlooms. Those were simply gone. Or so we thought. One Saturday, about 18 months after Katrina, we received a call from a woman named Grace. She'd found a waterlogged photo album, washed up in her yard in Arabay, several miles from our old home. Inside was a family photo with our names written on the back. "I've been trying to find you for months," she said. "I saved what I could." When we met her, she handed over a plastic container with our salvaged album. Most of the photos were ruined, but miraculously, a few had survived. Our wedding portrait, a Christmas with the kids when they were small, a faded image of me as a young man with my first school band. "I knew these would be important to someone," Grace said. "After losing so much myself, I understand the value of memories." That gesture of kindness from a stranger touched us deeply. It reminded us that, even in the worst circumstances, humanity persists. Grace became a friend, one of many connections formed in the aftermath of tragedy. As months turned into years, our city slowly healed. Not completely. New Orleans would never be exactly what it was before. Some neighborhoods, including parts of the lower Ninth Ward, remained sparsely populated. Many former residents never returned, creating a diaspora of New Orleanians across the country. The city's demographics and character shifted in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. But the resilience of those who stayed or returned was remarkable. Restaurants reopened with limited menus, but the same devotion to local cuisine. Music clubs brought back live performances. Mardi Gras parades resumed, perhaps more cathartic than celebratory at first. In 2009, 4 years after Katrina, I retired from teaching. The charter school had stabilized, finding a permanent location and expanding its music program. I felt I could step back, making way for younger teachers with fresh energy. Darlene continued her work with the non-profit, which had expanded to help with broader community revitalization efforts. With more time on my hands, I began volunteering, teaching music to children in still struggling neighborhoods. One afternoon each week, I'd set up in a community center in the lower Ninth Ward, offering free lessons to anyone interested. Sometimes only a few children would show up. Other times I'd have a dozen eager faces before me. It was during one of these sessions that I met Deshawn, a solemn 10-year-old with an intuitive understanding of rhythm. He rarely spoke, but transformed when he played the drums I'd brought. His grandmother, Ms. Loretta, would watch from the sidelines, beaming. "He's had a hard time since the storm," she told me after one lesson. "Barely talks. But this is bringing him back." Deshawn reminded me why music had always been my calling. It wasn't just about notes and technique. It was about expression, connection, healing. In our broken city, making music together became an act of reclamation. As the years passed, our lives found a new normal. We adjusted to our smaller home, our altered routines, our evolved city. Charlie grew old and eventually passed peacefully, at the age of 17, having experienced both the worst and best of humanity. We adopted another dog, a scrappy rescue named Duke, who never knew the pre-Katrina world. We marked anniversaries, 5 years since the storm, then 10. Each August 29th, the city would collectively remember, with memorial services and community events. For us, these anniversaries were complicated. Solemn recognition of all that was lost, but also acknowledgement of survival and renewal. 15 years after Katrina, in 2020, another crisis emerged, the COVID-19 pandemic. As our city once again faced disaster, I noticed something remarkable. The resilience developed after Katrina served New Orleanians well. People checked on neighbors, supported local businesses, found creative ways to maintain community despite isolation. The lessons of one catastrophe helped navigate another. Now, approaching my 70th birthday, I look back on the journey from that rooftop during Katrina to today. The path wasn't what I'd expected for my later years. It included more loss, more struggle, more starting over than I could have imagined. But it also brought unexpected gifts, deeper connections, newfound purpose, appreciation for life's essentials. Our old neighborhood has partially recovered. Some blocks have new homes built by nonprofits or determined former residents. Other areas remain vacant, reclaimed by nature. Vines and wildflowers covering empty lots where families once lived. The demographic makeup has shifted, with fewer of the original residents able to return. Last month, I visited my old school building, finally restored and reopened as a community center. Standing in what used to be my classroom, I felt the weight of both absence and presence. All that was lost, all that has been rebuilt. "You look like you've seen a ghost," said a voice behind me. I turned to find Deshawn, no longer the quiet boy with the drums, but a young man in his 20s, working as the center's music coordinator. Maybe I have, I said, smiling. The ghost of what was. He nodded, understanding. And what could be. That's the story of post-Katrina New Orleans, and my story too, navigating between what was, what is, and what could be. The city will never be the same as it was before the storm. Neither will I. The losses remain real. The neighbors who never returned. The family photographs dissolved in floodwaters. The sense of security washed away. But something new has emerged from the ruins. A hard-won wisdom about what truly matters. A deeper connection to place and community. An understanding that home isn't just physical structures, but something we carry within us and rebuild together. When Darlene and I talk about Katrina now, we no longer focus primarily on what was lost. Instead, we speak of what followed. The strangers who became friends. The small kindnesses that sustained us. The communities reformed and strengthened through shared survival. We didn't just survive, Darlene told a reporter doing a 15-year retrospective. We learned how to live differently. That's the unexpected legacy of disaster. Not just destruction, but transformation. Not just what is taken, but what is given. The opportunity to reassess, rebuild, and reimagine our lives with greater awareness of both fragility and strength. I sometimes wonder what my pre-Katrina self would think of my life now. Would he recognize this older man with fewer possessions but a richer understanding of community? Would he understand the path from devastation to this different kind of wholeness? I'd tell him what I now know. That losing everything doesn't mean the end of everything. That communities can fracture and reform in new patterns. That what seems permanent rarely is, for better and worse. That human connection matters more than physical structures. That music still plays, even after the waters rise. These aren't easy lessons, and they came at tremendous cost. But they're the truth I've lived since watching my city and my life transform beneath hurricane winds and floodwaters. They're the story written in New Orleans' still unfolding recovery, in the vacant lots and new constructions, in community gardens planted where homes once stood, in second-line parades that still wind through changed streets. They're the story written in me, a teacher who lost his classroom but found new ways to share music, a homeowner who lost his house but rediscovered the meaning of home, a New Orleanian who watched his city drown but witnessed its determined resurrection. Through it all, I've learned that resilience isn't about bouncing back to what was before. It's about moving forward into something new, carrying what remains after the storms have passed. The core of who we are, the connections that sustain us, the music that plays on. The end. For more real-life stories, do not forget to like and subscribe.